Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm visible and you can all hear me. Great, thank you so much. How's everybody doing? I hope we have been having an amazing session today. Every speaker before me has really done an amazing job, and I'm so happy to be here. My name is Wale. Just to keep it simple, you don't have to bother about the rest. Just call me Wale. And today we'll be looking through, how we can build threat intelligence feeds from scratch. I've given this talk before. I gave this talk in Rwanda about a month ago. So I'm just going to, go through it all over again for more audience. Please feel free to drop messages in the chat box, questions, and many more. I would really like to see a lot of engagement on the topic today. So please let me know, and I think we can move forward. So who am I? My name is Wale. Just like I said, I'm a SOC manager. Um, and also a threat intelligence manager. I work primarily out of East Africa, and we're really doing a lot of interesting things when it comes to threat intelligence and OSINT in Africa, in East Africa, and West Africa primarily. I'm also a developer. Aside building commercial softwares, I've been very much involved in building a lot of security tools. Um, we have developed, products like Darklens, Stellar Passers, and a bunch of other security tools that are mostly open source. If you have time, you can check out my GitHub. It's called L4Sec Security Labs on GitHub, and you can see a bunch of other security tools that we've developed. I also like to, tell people I'm a part-time threat actor, and the reason why I say this is because, during the day we are defending, but at night we usually go offensive. I run an avatar farm, so I get to interact a lot with threat actors, and this is exactly why I said I'm a part-time threat actor. And something I also do believe in is, um, the best form of attack is the best form of defense is attack. Now, I usually use the analogy of football. You can score me as many goals, but if I outscore you, at the end of the day, I win. So I typically always say, the best form of defense is attacking. And can move on. I think we before we even talk about building threat intelligence feeds, it's very important to talk about exactly what a threat intelligence feed is, and then we can start slowly from there, right? So primarily, or I would say like back in the day, threat intelligence feeds used to be just, a bunch of IP addresses, domain, file hashes, and things like that, that, you could throw into your SIM and then, block connections, either outbound or inbound connections to these, indicators, either an IP address or domain or file hashes, right? But moving forward, right now, we have gone past the stage of where we say, threat intelligence is just a bunch of IP addresses and domains. What it is right now is, or what it should be, in case you are still, thinking threat intelligence is just a list of IP address. What threat intelligence should be is a pipeline collection, right? Whereby you collect a lot of data, you normalize it, you enrich it, you score it, and then you can distribute it. So this is exactly what a threat intelligence feed should be. So internally in the organizations, or if you are just a cyber threat intelligence practitioner or OSINT practitioner, this is something very, very important to note for you to know that, look, we've gone past this stage where, threat intelligence is usually just a bunch of, IPs, domains, and things like that. But you know now we've moved into a whole full pipeline, and your feed should be explainable. You should be able to reproduce it, and it should also be very much editable, right? And this is how we determine what is a quality threat intelligence feed. And of course, something very important to notice, what you give is what you take, right? So garbage in, garbage out. If you have bad feeds, and of course, it means as an analyst, you're going to be fatigued, right? So bad feeds equals to alert fatigue, because now you're going to be having a lot of false positives, a lot of true positives, negative negatives, unknown, known knowns, just so many unprocessed data, right? So the more quality feed you have, the more actionable intelligence you are able to get, right? And then I think the next thing would be, why do you need to build your own feed? Why do you need to build your own food? Um, Not just Africa, but a lot of times we've seen where attackers leverage uh, cheap hosting, under monitored ISPs and growing internet infrastructures, environments where these are very active. And then they try to take advantage of this, right? So not just in Africa alone, but we are seeing, maybe Asia, for example, we're seeing a lot of infrastructure going up, being used by attackers, right? And this, includes, anywhere basically threat actors can get cheap VPNs on the monitored ISPs and growing internet infrastructure. And that is exactly why Africa is a main concern, right? And, just like I said, emerging hosting, less scrutiny, and this is exactly what is attractive to threat actors. And generally, organizations would require more visibility into this space, right? So if you're thinking, why do I need to build your own feed? Make sure you have a specific requirement, and when you're building your own feed, you need to build something that is repeatable, just like I said earlier, defensible, and focused largely on C2 hunting, command and control hunting, right? So when we're talking about C2 command and control infrastructure, there are certain basics we first need to understand. The first thing is, what are indicators? Indicators of compromise, indicators of uh, IOCs and IOIs, right? So things like IP addresses, domains, ASL, SSL or TLS certificates, GA3 fingerprints, file hashes, um, these are the basics of what forms a command and control center, right? Not just aside that, there are also behavioral characteristics of you see before you can actually say, okay, this would most likely be a command and control for maybe a ransomware, malware, or a rat. Things like fast flux DNS, where we are seeing repeated connections, repeated maybe domains, being constantly assigned to an IP address, but it's being burnt as fast as possible. Short-lived certificates, SSL certificates. Threat actors are also advancing. Gone are the days where you see a phishing website that doesn't have SSL, right? These days, we are seeing infrastructures that are properly set up with encryption, SSL and things like that. So, one very thing to note, want to note is these types of certificates are usually very short-lived, right? Because they are used for an attack, and then most likely the threat actors will burn these domains or infrastructure, and set up another one to carry out another attack. Odd pods are also something that is very important to note. We see a lot of times, you won't see your standard pods being used. You could see things like pod 5050, pod 8000, pod 3000, pod 2000, 2050, and things like that, right? And aside behavior, it's also important to, identify life cycles, right? We see an infrastructure being set up, and then the next thing, we see a short usage, which also comes back to the short certifications that we talk about, and then infrastructure is being burnt and then being replaced by an attacker. So these are actually, um, very basic, easy to tell characteristics of any C2 infrastructure out there being hosted by a threat actor. And now moving on to the pipeline, right? Well, remember I said threat intelligence feeds um, should move beyond just IP collection of IP addresses or domains, file hashes, and so it's actually supposed to be a pipeline. And the first stage of that pipeline is collection. So collection is basically looking at sources where we can realistically take data from, right? If we are not going to be building data ourselves. So the first thing, of course, and this is where OSINT comes into place, right? Public feeds is the first one. And when we're talking about public feeds, we have so many available public feeds at the moment. We could look at abuse.ch, there's threatfox, there's URL host, malware bazaar, Fiodo, so many existing threat feeds that are out there. And also, you want to also, be able to, maybe collect data from DNS providers like Setstream, CRT.sh. These are actually very, very good data sources when you're trying to identify either new, infrastructure, renewed certificates, things like that. You can also check out BGP data. There's also a lot of malware sandboxes that you can also integrate as your sources, such as like hybrid analysis, any.run, pretty much any platform that actually provides you with malware information. And of course, if you work in SOC, you also already know that SOC data, all the data internally in an environment can also serve as intelligence data. It can also serve as threat intelligence or, or OSINT itself. So it's very important to take note of this type of data and integrate them, when building your feed. And of course, dark web crawlers, any crawler, there's so many open source tools at the moment that allows you to crawl the dark web, to be able to, either find things like click configurations with C2 list. If you go on Russia market, you're going to see a lot of these type of things, Genesis and co. Right. So now we've talked about collection. You need to be able to collect, data. And of course, it's very important, in threat intelligence and OSINT, we talk about context, where context really matters, right? So you need to have a context before you can, carry on with your investigation or actually to enrich whatever you're investigating or building, right? So now that, with context, we can actually determine what is the best place for me to collect additional data that I need to build my feed with, right? So you can either use public feeds, DNS providers like Setstream or CRT.sh. If you're looking to build, malware-related feeds, you can also get additional information from sandboxes and the likes, right? So context also really matters in collecting information. Now, once you've collected all this data, all this information, they are unstructured. Most likely would be unstructured, and if you're collecting from data from multiple sources, there's also chances that the data are probably structured but not structured the same way, right? If you call it the way ThreatFox is going to give you data is going to be different from the way Abuse also presents its data, right? So now you have data coming from different sources. You need to be able to normalize this data and find structure it in a way that works for you based on your context, right? So you can convert of everything, of course. You can canonical forms, your domains, IP addresses, the fingerprints from the certificates, file hashes, ASN, and things like that. And also, something that is very important to note is you can get duplicates, right? So many feeds, can identify maybe the same indicators and apply them to you. So you need to be able to normalize this data. You need to be able to identify repetitive apologies. I think I had a breakout in between sessions there. Yes, I'm back, guys. I'm back, guys. Yes. All right. So, yes, we were really talking about normalization and being able to identify multiple domains and multiple IP addresses so that you don't have this can actually lead to alert fatigue. And it's important to note that look, when I'm getting data from various sources, I should be able to identify duplicates and resolve to just one. So yes, then once been able to normalize that data, the next step would be to actually now enrich what you have, right? So you have an IP address, you need to be able to get additional information about that IP address. You have a domain, you need to be able to get additional information about the domain. You have a file hash, does it belong to a malware family? These are things that serve as enrichment to an indicator that you already have, right? So things like geolocation, ASN, hosting provider reputation, certificate transparency, historical whois, passive DNS timeline, banners, and things like that. With banners alone, you can easily actually identify C2 infrastructure. A lot of threat actors do not, bother themselves about changing default settings, things like banners that can actually give away um, information about the service running on either a port or a web server, right? So this is how you are actually going to now enrich whatever indicator you've been able to fetch across several sources that you have. And once you've been able to do that, the next step would now be to, be able to actually score, right? Or detect properly. Before we go into score, we're actually going to talk about detection heuristics, which is now be able to confirm what this infrastructure that we've identified does, right? We've talked about fast flux, where we can see that one maybe domain name is being assigned multiple IP addresses within a short period of time. Things like recent registrations, right? If a domain is apologies, if a domain is registered newly, you need to be able to identify that. If it's maybe a domain that has been alive, but there was a what's it called now? There was a period where this domain was not active, but then it became active again. These are actually indicators that you need to also be able to follow up with. Then there is in like malware families, right, where attackers are literally using their certificates across multiple malware families. And all able to see like I've always seen this in an existing malware family or C2 infrastructure. We spoke about uncommon ports and also hosting in weird ASNs, right? These are things to also take note of. Then we talk about scoring itself. So, well, we've finally identified an infrastructure. We need to be able to give it a risk score. And this is the part where a lot of people could get it wrong. Um, so when you're scoring, you need to also context comes into play, right? Saying for this feed I'm building, what matters most to me? Is it the domain reputation, hosting reputation, um, domain age? Are we seeing fast flux activities? And is there a certificate reuse? You know, these are just a baseline. There could be other um, metrics. There could be other metrics that you would find more useful to you. What you see on your screen is just a baseline metrics that's important for you to track, right? So things like domain hosting reputation. Um, for example, if you see an infrastructure being hosted on a known bulletproof hosting site, that's it's already a red flag, right? So based on your context, you can actually define what metrics you're looking out for and then assign them the appropriate weights, right? So W1, W2, W3, W4 are just weight scores. Um, and it's also always nice to, cap your weight score at one so you can identify maybe domain reputation, hosting reputation. If it's a metrics that is important for you, you can maybe score it 0.2. The domain age is also something important to know. You can score that maybe 0.2. Fast flux activity is a big red flag. You might score it 0.3. Certificate reuse a lot of time does not, mean the certificate is fake, self-signed, or is being associated with the malware family. A lot of people, use reuse certificates across their domains, right? So maybe you want to give this a score of 0.1, right? And then if there are any other metrics that you have, you can now decide to um, assign them a rate score according to what you want. And at the end of the day, once you're able to, calculate the score, now you want to be able to now give it a threshold. So if you're saying that, a particular infrastructure, maybe after scoring, and detection heuristics, you can see that the score is less than 40, then maybe really that is, not malicious and you do want to focus your efforts on that, right? But then when you're saying scores between 40 to 70, this is it's getting interesting because now we can see that a lot of metrics that we're looking out for are actually present, right? So you want to maybe put this on a watch list or give it a medium, severity level. And then if you're seeing, scores from 70 upwards, these are, what we need to be focusing our efforts on in terms of escalation, in terms of monitoring, in terms of also, just seeing what's on what's being hosted on this type of infrastructure, right? And of course, all of these metrics that I've said, should actually be tunable, right? If you miss this, if you get it wrong, you might, you might uh, the word is escaping me, but you'll be able to you would just be able to drown your analyst in a lot of alerts, because now there's so many alerts, and these alerts for these infrastructures are false positives, and of course alert fatigues come to place, right? So remember, bad feeds equals alert fatigue. And alert fatigue means, analysts, threat intelligence analysts become drowned in a lot of alerts, which are usually false positives. And if you're having a lot of false positives from your feeds, analysts, typical analysts would, not pay so much attention to this. So this is exactly why these metrics should be tunable, adjust them, according to, your context, and you can actually score a threat properly. And the moment you are able to do this, now we move to the next step, which is validation. And validation will always require a human being, right? We've been everything we've been saying, as that we've been talking about, being automated actions, right? But with this, after we've now been able to detect, we've been able to score, we've adjusted our metrics. Now we need to actually validate and say, look, this feed, these alerts that we've actually been able to get, how valid is it, right? Is this a confirmed false positive? Is it a confirmed true positive? And that can actually only be done, by a human analyst to review what the feed is providing us, the data from the feed, right? So you need an analyst, of course, to confirm or reject. You can also validate with, sandboxes, look for callbacks to these infrastructures, right? Basically, outbound connections to these type of infrastructures that we've identified. And if you work with a local set in your country, you can also relate to these sets, not just sets. If you have trusted partners, maybe you're part of ISACs, you're part of MISP sharing platforms, you can also validate this data through these mediums. And also, remember, talked about internal data being, we talked about internal data being part of threat intelligence also. So when you see something internally, you can also validate internally and say, look, are we already looking at this? Have we seen this data? Have we seen this infrastructure internally? Have we seen any outbound or inbound connections to or from this particular detected infrastructure from our alerts, right? So that is that would be with validation. So we're looking at Africa, right? So something that is always very important to consider is not just Africa. This can also be generalized broadly. Is infrastructure maturity, right? Maturity across several countries differ. The USA, for example, would definitely be more mature in terms of infrastructure, in terms of monitoring ISPs, detecting this type of issues. But then if you move downwards to maybe developing countries, underdeveloped countries, the maturity level is very much different. In these countries, they are still talking about things like internet penetration and the likes. So of course, much attention would not be given to this type of attacks. And that's exactly why, remember in the beginning of the slides, we talked about, um, places where there are less scrutiny in terms of infrastructure is where attackers are looking out for, right, to host their infrastructures, right? So also some providers are bulletproof. This is also something to note. Limited local cyber threat intelligence sharing. Um, we need to build relationship with our sets and ISP to be able to relate, the data that we're seeing from our feeds, and see how we can also help, on a third level, on an ISP level, to be able to block out these threats. Language specific campaigns also, to detect and throw more light on this type of infrastructures, and then telecom driven internet. So when the moment this is something I'm looking at that might happen in the future. So this is more of like a predictive considerations where we might eventually in the future see threat actors move their infrastructure to mobile environments, and this would actually make detections more harder, right? And providing more situ hiding opportunities for threat actors. And so like a typical workflow would be, when you let's assume you're building feeds to detect impersonation attacks, for example, right? So we're looking at, of course, the first thing, this is the context. Impersonation attack is the context. So if we're trying to build a feed around impersonation attacks, one of the first things we would be interested in is identifying domains that are being registered in real time, right? So the moment you identify a domain, the first thing you want to do is resolve it to an ASN. See where this ASN is hosted. Is it hosted in the US? Is it hosted by Cloudflare? Is it hosted by some random ISPs, right? And based on your context, remember you can assign it a weight score, right? And once you've in a malicious situation case, right? We've now been able to see that look, this particular infrastructure, we've seen certificates being reused, and these certificates that are being reused, on these hosting infrastructure belongs to a malware family, right? And we've also, identified fast flux activities. Then it's very easy to say that look, this is definitely a malicious activity, or this is a malicious infrastructure. Then you can is it running impersonation? Is it hosting a C2? Because now we've seen a malware certificate on it. Then we can start looking out for other C2 related behaviors, right? Like fast flux and things like that. And yeah, locally also, if you have a SOC, something also to check out, whereby you can now check internally and say, look, have we been seeing outbound connections to this particular domain or IP address? And if you've seen that, you can now decide to escalate basically. So in theory, we've talked about the entire pipeline, starting from collection now down to validation, right? So that is the full pipeline. But operationally, how would this look like, right? So remember, the first step is to collect information from sources, right? So you can decide to collect, as many sources as you like, sandboxes, internal logs, existing thread feeds. Once you get that, you want to put them, run it through Kafka, or put them in some sort of queue just to make sure, like, look, you're getting consistent data. And then this makes it actually easy to normalize. So if you want, you can decide to build a separate normalization engine, whereby what it does is as all of these feeds are coming in, as all of these feeds are coming in from different sources, the engine is the first step, and what it's doing is taking all these different structured data from different feeds and normalizing it in a way whereby you now can single structure and make use of it, right? And then the moment you're able to analyze the data, it's going to be easy for you to actually reach. Now you've removed things like duplicates. There are is a verifiable source, and then we can enrich things like GOI, geolocation, things like certificates, even things down to fast flux activities. You can actually enrich it and associate those infrastructure, those IP addresses with other, observed metadata. And once you've done this, this is where you now build your scoring engine, where you now say, look, um, based on certain metrics that are important to me. This is remember this is where your context comes in, right? So you now score each of these threads or this each of these infrastructure that we are actually observing in the wild, and once you score it, remember we're dealing with so many domains, right? That are coming in real time. You want to definitely have some sort of database where you're storing all of this information in, structured, of course. And of course, you can also now take this data and present it as some sort of CTI or analyst dashboard or a feed, structured feed where anyone can actually come to and either integrate it or just take a look at what's going on. Then of course, you can also output this in a way whereby it is stable by your same or SOA security solution that you have internally. So this is also this is exactly how the architecture looks like. Very simple architecture. It just takes each level just improves on the raw data that we are getting. Right, you collect the data, you normalize it, you enrich it, you score it, and then you present this information for validation by remember your analysts, your search, your sharing platforms, and things like that, even down to your internal teams also. So, common pitfalls. This is also something very, very important to note because we're collecting. First things we're collecting data from so many sources, or so it's important that you do not make the mistake of over collecting data, right? Remember, that's exactly why I'm bringing context into this conversation, right? Because now you could over collect data, right? And then these, would allow your feed to, maybe too many duplicates. You could be having, um, irrelevant data, and this just, causes your feed to be bloated, right? So now you have too many things to deal with, too many normalization issues, things like that. So start with what you need. That's exactly so. If you are looking out for automation attack as a use case, you want to be able to look at what feed gives makes sense to me to collect data from, right? So you just don't collect from XYZ, and then at the end of the day you have so many data coming that are not to the context, right? And something that is also common is is blindly trusting third party feeds. For example, a lot of us blindly trust whatever information that we get from a platform like Virus Total, for example. We just automatically say, once I put a domain in Virus Total, whatever I see is what it is, right? We don't go further to revalidate these data that we are seeing, right? So a lot of us just blindly trust. So that what that means is if your third party feeds that you're integrating or collecting has high level of false positives, it means your feed also is going to have a high level of false positives, right? So yes, it's we can integrate, but also make sure that while integrating these third party feeds, we're also able to verify the data coming from these third party feeds. Remember, bad feed equals alert fatigue. Alert fatigue equals, missing out because now analysts are not going to, focus on your feeds, right? So um, that takes me to ignoring validation, which I just, spoke about. Because we're getting this from this thing, it's confirmed. I don't need to validate, and we move on, right? Also, not documenting your decisions. Why am I doing this? Why are we using this context? Why do we have this scoring metrics? Why are we giving certain weights certain metric? This is something that is very important to note. And of course, there are also legal issues, just in case, if you are looking at building feeds, collecting data from this, from maybe a region and presenting it in another region. These are the, this could pose legal issues. So you want to be making sure that you're collecting the right data from the right place, and there are no legalities around data collection, even around maybe data processing and dissemination, right? So yeah, um, so talking about takeaways, right? Just like I said, start small. You don't need so many feeds to start off with. You can maybe pick one or two feeds, and then from there you build up. You make sure that look, with my context, am I really getting what I need? Do I need to maybe integrate more feeds? Do I need to improve on my scoring or detection heuristics? And you keep iterating till you have a very good, trustworthy, validated feed. And yeah, build a pipeline, not list, just like we earlier said. Um, Threat intelligence feeds in the past used to be lists of IP addresses, but these days, the way to go is to build a pipeline and make sure, look, you are able to enrich your feed properly, right? Whatever infrastructure you see, make sure you're able to enrich it, get as much data from different sources about this particular infrastructure. Context is king, of course, right? ISPs and ASN and also infrastructure maturity differs across different regions. So this is also something you need to take note about. And eventually, after all of these things, there is a piece which is the and who will come and validate all of the data, all the automation of building your own feeds, right? The analyst, the intelligence analyst, at the end of the day, is the one who validates, right? So analysts in general will close out the loop of whatever you're building at the end of the day. So I hope this makes sense. I hope I've been able to communicate. I hope we get the point of why you should be building your own threat intelligence feeds. Internally, you can do it in a region. Your context really matters in this scenario. So there's a sample working truth that I built with the basic baseline in terms of scoring. I called it Anansi C2. Um, uh, it's still work in progress, but it's going to be pushed to GitHub under the link that you can see. And as you can see, based on infrastructures, for example, this is what I'm doing here is to actually detect malware infrastructure in Africa, right? So we're looking at on the fly, we're looking at newly registered domains in less than I think 30 days, a month in Africa. So and we're now looking at things like certificates. We're looking at where is this ASN hosted in? Is it Cloudflare? Is it a known bulletproof host? Things like that. And I've now been able to assign weights to these metrics. Sorry, to be able to score it and see which is potentially malicious or not, right? So I'll be pushing it up on GitHub very soon on Anansi C2 repository, so you can start it or watch the repository, and of course in the future contribute also. Yeah, so I think we've come to the end of this thing. I'll be happy to take questions. Let's see the chats. I think I see a lot of questions on the chat box already. Wow, so many questions. I like this. I like, when people ask questions, it means, people are following. So I'll take one question from Bellissimo. It says, how do you balance heuristic-based detection versus machine learning-based scoring? Do you use heuristics as pre-filters or as your primary signal? That's actually a very, very good question. So for me, remember, I think the first thing to start is your context, right? Your context would matter, and with the context, you can actually now determine, look, do I need to use look at how to automate these heuristics, like you said, ML based storing, or do I use it as pre-filter? So I think to answer your question, I think the question the key thing is the context, which what you can now determine and look, man, do I use bring heuristic first, or do I use, some sort of scoring engines, machine learning to learn over time, and now be able to assign weight scores to these metrics.